When you're learning any programming language, being able to give some output in the console is a great way to start because it makes it easy to see whatever you're running in your program. And that doesn't just go for new developers. I know when I was learning how to program, I would get frustrated that I had to do console logging and things like that because it felt like I wasn't building a real program. But the longer I've been developing professionally, the more I actually use that in my day-to-day development. And we'll talk about that the more the course goes on, but it's pretty much a daily basis where I will write something out to the console when I'm trying to debug a program, or I'll test an algorithm out in environment where I'm just printing out to the console, so I'm not worried about doing something wrong to the actual application. I run a lot of tests in there, that kind of thing. So that's all. It may seem like you're not building any programs, but these are some of the basic fundamentals that are really important to know. So I'm going to talk about a couple different kinds of ways to print out to the console, and there's going to be two that we're going to do in this course, and I'll show you what the difference is right here. So I'm going to set up a few different things. First, I'm going to say puts, which is one way of doing it, and say a string and hit run, and you can see that it prints out a string. Now I can do just P and same thing, hit run. Now this looks like it did the same thing, right? It printed this out the same way it printed out right here, but you notice that here in this first version when we did puts, it returned nil, but here when we did P, it actually returned the entire string itself. That may not seem like a big deal, but as you get further along, you'll see it actually makes a very big difference, because what this means is if you say you're running a real world application and you want to debug an item and see what gets printed out when you print out the console, but you also need the program to keep working. If you use puts, that value is not going to be returned with, say, the end of a method. But if you use P, it's actually going to still return the same value. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. So those are two different ways to print out to the console. And this works not only with strings, and obviously it could work with integers. You can see it runs right there. And it also works with arrays. And we haven't got into arrays a lot, but it's something pretty easy to do in Ruby, and we're going to dedicate an entire section to arrays. So we'll get into that later, but hit run, and you can see it's the same thing. Change P to puts, hit run, and you can see here that the puts on the array side actually iterated over the array. One, it didn't return anything, but instead of printing out the array itself, it printed out all the values. So say that I have a string of or an array of integers, hit run, you can see it puts actually iterated over each of those values, where if I do P, hit run, and it prints out a integer array. So it may not seem at first like there's a big difference, but there really is. So make sure that you know the differences when you're using each one of them. Through this course, you're going to see me use both relatively interchangeably, just because I've been doing it for a while and I know when to use one over the other. But I would definitely play around with it as you go through the course so that you can learn what some of those subtle differences are. But those are the biggest ones. To review, the regular puts is going to not return anything, and if you give it any type of enumerator like an array, it's going to iterate over each element and print each one out, whereas P is going to print out the entire object itself.